one of the most valuable resources are personal data, as we heard. However, data for business purposes has led the EU legislator to strengthen data protection through the GDPR. But is this standing in the way of achieving innovative use of AI? Listen to Mr. Simon Planzer.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Good afternoon. Have you ever made the experience that you had these wonderful management ideas and then your mood was spoiled by the many concerns of a legal counsel who tells you that you can't do it? I trust you have. Henrik and Göran have outlined the opportunities that AI, digital transformation and innovation will boost. And now, traditionally, it would be for the legal counsel to spoil the mood. But I won't do that. In fact, I'm going to argue in the second half of my presentation that we can look at data protection and GDPR specifically as an opportunity to be embraced rather than a legal annoyance to overcome. Let me start with a real-life scenario as it could take place in the gaming industry. Imagine a young, ambitious and qualified woman, several years of working experience. She's called Sarah. Sarah is looking for a new professional challenge and applies to several jobs in the gaming industry with Kindred and other industry leaders. She's asked to submit her application information via a web tool that is demanding specific information and documentation. She also has to respond to questions of an AI interviewer that would traditionally be asked by real persons on site. Now, after a few weeks, she receives the first rejection. She's informed that the company has found a more suitable candidate, but they wish her all the best for her career. Within the next few days, Sarah receives rejections from all her other applications too. What Sarah does not know, no human being has ever reviewed and assessed her application. All rejections were based on automated decisions based on and taken by AI, in essence by algorithms. What Sarah does not know either, all gaming companies use the same algorithms developed by the same service provider. Accordingly, the fact of being rejected by all companies was not a human coincidence, but an AI necessity. You will probably agree this raises questions. In this imagined scenario, is this imagined scenario completely unrealistic within the next decade or so? I doubt it. More and more companies rely on various forms of digital support, and an automated decision recruiting enabled by AI are just one expression of these possibilities. R&D into AI-facilitated software solutions requires a lot of time and highly specialized expertise. In other words, they are costly. Accordingly, B2Cs are likely to purchase solutions already provided by leading service providers in that field. Now, let me illustrate some risks. Automated decision-making algorithms carry the risk of potentially learning from and indeed reproducing human biases, or even introducing new biases. Such algorithms have to be trained, but what will be the training data for these algorithms? It could be data from previous HR decisions taken by humans. Let's assume the HR department that served as training data occasionally took discriminatory decisions in the past, in various forms. For example, rejecting applications from female candidates in a certain range of age. The algorithm would have been trained by this past data set. It would learn to reproduce such biased behavior and accordingly reject respective applications without a human intervening and acting as a correcting factor. With this in mind, we will now take a look at the European Data Protection Framework. Recognizing on the one hand that AI can improve areas of our lives, but also recognizing on the other hand that risks that AI and in particular automated decision making can show. What is the objective really, fundamentally, of the EU General Data Protection Regulation? The GDPR aims at protecting human beings from unlawful processing of their personal data. In its preamble, it states that the processing of personal data should be designed to serve mankind, not to harm it. In our example, we came to realize that automated decision-making can infringe fundamental rights of humans. It may be seen as going against the most fundamental right, human dignity. Sarah should be able to expect that her merits are assessed by HR experts and future line managers. Or alternatively, Sarah should be entitled to know that this was not the case. And indeed, Article 22 provides for a general prohibition of automated decision-making if it produces legal effects for Sarah or significantly affects her. But as we know, in the legal field, for every rule there are exceptions. And these exceptions are addressed in paragraph 2 of the same provision. First of all, the general prohibition of Article 22 only applies to situations where automated processing and/or profiling produce legal effect or a similarly significant effect for individuals. And the according decisions must be taken solely by automated means, without any human intervention. Sarah is legally affected, indeed, since her status as an employee is at stake, and the decision was taken solely by automated means. Now, some of you may wonder, does it change if a natural person proceeds to a final additional review of the results produced by the ADM algorithm? Without predicting how courts would decide, I would say, knowing how the Court of Justice tends to interpret EU law, there is a solid likelihood that the court would say it's not enough. When a company appoints a natural person to review the ADM results, if that person does not have the decision-making powers and actual possibility to overrule the ADM results. Second, the GDPR provides for exceptions in which the use of ADM is not prohibited. Namely, if the decisions are necessary for the performance of or entering into a contract, authorized by union or member state law, or thirdly, based on the data subject's explicit consent. Let's take a quick look at these exceptions. In which areas can we imagine automated decision-making? Short, ADM. ADM is particularly suitable to address many questions that are able to feature clear answers. The more complex and gray tone it gets, the more difficult it can become for ADM solutions. Now, the tricky legal requirement here is the question whether the ADM was really necessary in a given situation. Maybe this is the case where we have a very high number of applications to be examined. Courts will have to provide precedents on these questions. Secondly, ADM can take place if union or member state law authorizes its use. The relevant law must also lay down suitable measures to safeguard the data subject's rights and freedoms and legitimate interests. This can include its use for monitoring and preventing fraud, tax evasion, or AML. Member states have discretion in implementing such rules. And in fact, another purpose of such national provision could relate to responsible gambling and the prevention of problem gambling. Thirdly, we have consent. Consent means a freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous indication of Sarah's will by which she, by way of a statement or a clear affirmative action, signals agreement to that kind of processing of her personal data. The idea of consent follows in Europe very much the model of informational self-determination. In order to make self-determined decisions, Sarah must be first properly informed. Consent should not be regarded as freely given if the data subject has no genuine or free choice or is unable to refuse or withdraw consent without detriment. Consent as a requirement for the performance of a contract is also prohibited. Consent cannot be seen as a freely given in case of a clear imbalance between the data subject and the controller. For instance, if the controller is a public authority. Now the question is, can imbalance also be seen in the relationship between an employee and the gaming company? This is yet another question that has not yet been decided in courts. What does this all mean applied to our example involving Sarah? ADM in recruiting can produce legal effect for Sarah. The scenario falls within the scope of GDPR. And if the process is fully automated, without a person being empowered to review and overrule, a general prohibition applies. But we have the three powerful exceptions: necessity for the performance of a contract, an EU or national legal basis, Sarah's explicit consent. In order to truly protect Sarah in this process, Article 22 requires that the gaming company's data controller shall implement suitable measures to safeguard Sarah's legitimate interests. Such interest can consist in having available a possibility to obtain a human intervention from a gaming company, the possibility that she can express her point of view, that Sarah is heard, as well as the possibility to challenge the decision. Now, let us move to our next person, the player Sine. I'm now coming back to my initial proposal that a gaming company such as Kindred can embrace data protection as an opportunity to compose smart company policies that will result in a USP, a unique selling proposition. Policies that build consumer trust. Policies that maintain consumer trust. Just as Kindred has done already in relation to RG, turning a compliance issue into an opportunity, gaining consumer trust with innovative new approaches. The key element in view of building such trust consists in transparency. Transparency builds trust, and trust will lead to increased acceptance of data processing by the likes of Sine. One of your biggest assets you have in the portfolio, your players. How can a gaming company feature transparency? The GDPR offers some requirements, but of course there is a difference between trying to comply with a minimum standard because one has to, or truly building a company policy that is embraced and lived by everybody working on data matters. We should accordingly always read the aforementioned exceptions in conjunction with the requirements of transparency enshrined in Articles 13 and following. In fact, these transparency rules apply whenever personal data is being processed, irrespective of the difference whether it takes place automated or not. In relation to ADM specifically, Articles 13 and following require that data controllers provide specific, easily accessible information about the automated decision-making, including profiling. Further, Sine has the right to access her data. This includes an obligation to provide information on the existence of ADM, as well as meaningful information about the algorithm logic involved and the significance and consequences of the processing for the individual. This right to access information is of particular importance for trust building where AI is involved, where automated processing and decision making directly affect individuals. They will want to understand how the algorithm will come or has come to a decision concerning them. In the gaming company is using automated decision making. If the gaming company, is using automated decision making, it must do the following. Tell the data subject that they are engaging in this type of activity, provide meaningful information about the logic involved, and explain the significance and envisaged consequences of the processing. Now, what does it really mean to provide meaningful information? And in fact, what should it mean in practice, in my view? The obligation to provide meaningful information about the logic involved can, in conjunction with artificial intelligence and machine learning, lead to some difficulties. Because of the sheer complexity of such algorithms, it can be challenging for a layperson to understand how an automated decision-making process works. The GDPR requires the controller to provide meaningful information about the logic involved. But such information does not have to be a complex explanation about the algorithm. In fact, I would argue it should consist of simple and accurate information in order to be meaningful to the data subject. In essence, providing Cine in simple words and pictures with the rationale behind or the criteria relied on in reaching the decisions. This information should be so comprehensive as to enable Cine to understand the reasons for the decision. Again, this should not be seen as just a duty to be compliant, but as a possibility to really inform the data subject and be really transparent. I can even imagine informing Cine in gamified ways, something that would be far more approachable to many players than complex and lengthy general terms and conditions. What can we conclude? AI will increasingly become part of our everyday life. With the GDPR, we have a solid legal framework to address data protection concerns. In its white paper on AI, the European Commission points at the importance of grounding AI in European values and fundamental rights, as, for example, privacy protection. According to the European Commission, the key element for AI is an ecosystem of trust. Gaming companies can build this trust among players, not just by being merely compliant with the GDPR, but by embracing data protection as a genuine policy. The trust from players will result in higher acceptance of the use of AI, as the players will be convinced that the gaming company pursues an effective data protection policy. We live in times of a clash of political systems and values. In a multipolar world that features several world leaders, European companies should see the strong focus on data protection as a European value that can translate in a competitive advantage in doing business globally and in serving players that do not enjoy that protection by their domestic laws. As Kindred is already doing with responsible gambling, by walking a significant extra mile, data protection can build and maintain a new level of trust from consumers to the gaming company. And finally, as we know, it takes a long time to build trust, but only a few seconds to lose it. Therefore, it makes sense to pay enough attention not only to trust building, but also to trust maintaining measures. Thank you very much.